Okay, so I'm live streaming. Great. So this is my first live streaming episode. Hopefully it comes out good. Um, I'm over here on YouTube for my Bright Clue. Bright Clue, of course, is in case you just don't know, Bright Clue is actually the corporation that I started, and I do business under my corporation name. So all my little projects I kind of do underneath them. This is one of those. Work Game Perk is a project kind of underneath the Bright Clue umbrella and the mission. Anyway, so that's why I'm over here. I'm on here to talk to you about setting boundaries. And this is my episode of the Well Made podcast, which is, of course, my podcast about self care. And been studying and working on setting boundaries, setting personal boundaries, so that you can make time for self care. And I think that's the first step, is being able to make time and find time and making self care a priority. So this is the third part on my series about recognizing boundaries. And on this episode, we're going to be talking about relationships and where boundaries fit inside different types of relationships. Because as you know, so of course boundaries we talked about on the first episode. They're a life skill, and boundaries they really dictate the way you're treated, what people can expect, and how you expect expectations you have from others. And you're the one that sets those. No matter how your boundaries and how you're being treated impacts you, you definitely have a stick in the fight once you learn how to manage boundaries. So on this episode, we're going to talk about a little bit about the different types of relationships. I'm going to identify some different categories of relationships and talk about a few different some examples of boundaries or boundary areas that I know personally I have found some areas, some unhealthy signals in my own life. After I get through all of this recognizing boundaries, I will get into some other episodes where we talk about defining boundaries and how to define your defense and define your protection system for boundaries. So that's all to come. But so far, really, we've just been digging in on how do you know if unhealthy boundaries is something that you should be kind of like putting some time towards. And that's where we're at here. So what is me versus what is not me? When you're talking about boundaries, a lot of the times people come to the boundaries topic from some sort of a place of healing, or you might be in a place where you're starting something brand new and you really don't know what to expect. And so you're trying to set boundaries so you can kind of create a little bit of certainty around your experience. Or if you're healing, like say for instance, I know in the past I've been in a place of healing where I had a job where the job just really just didn't, I wasn't valued the way I wanted to be valued. And some of the relationships had kind of gotten a little old and stagnant. And I wanted to grow. And I was in a job for a long time where I was not able to grow at all. And so I've been healing from those boundary issues that I was kind of putting in on myself, and the work and the job was kind of putting in on me. I've been healing for those from the last 6 months. Also, you might see boundaries in relationships where, you might have just started dating someone, or maybe you're starting a new relationship and you've got to establish boundaries. Quite often, and specifically from my personal experience, I experienced a lot of boundary issues working from home and trying to work with my children during virtual schooling. Lots of boundary issues about how I usually work. So the first thing I want to talk about is you want to think objectively about the experiences, situations, and actions when you're trying to discover kind of where you are with these specific boundaries. So I've put together some really critical questions that could help you to discover where your boundaries are involved in some of these relationships. So do you have the same perspectives on boundaries at work and personal? This is one of the areas where you might help you decide, is it really me or is it not me? Specifically like at work, some of the things that you're going to encounter in terms of toxic relationships are not you. And like in my specific situation, I had a relationship with my supervisor, which was great, which was awesome. It just kind of got stagnated because he got so many other things to do, and I was not a priority in that and that whole perspective of all the things he had to do. And so, not blaming anybody for it, but it just made for a spot where I couldn't get my growth done. I couldn't get any fulfillment because I was just not a priority. And as a result, I would come up with ideas. I would take training. I would try to establish leadership over projects, and it wasn't aligned with what he was doing. So I had to learn where my boundaries were, and that's why I had to get up out of there, because at the end of the day, even though I could change and do a lot of things about the way I was wanting to be treated and say and what I could do to protect myself, some of it wasn't me. And I just had, in my healing process, I've had to realize what really is my, what do I own in the situation? What role do you play in those relationships? And again, in that particular relationship, I had to play the role of, the employee. So I was not the supervisor. I was not the lead. I could lead in certain areas from the back and from the bottom, but in certain areas I just had to follow and I had to kind of conform. So realizing where you actually play in the relationship, what role you actually play in the relationship, that's what these next few slides are going to help, because I'm going to kind of talk about some different relationships and how they might impact the boundaries a little bit. You can set a little bit differently, where you might hear the unhealthy and healthy signals, and what's in bounds, in the bounds of protection. As an employee, for me, what was in bounds for me, I've said that twice. What was in bounds was specifically my ideas and my creativity. I want to grow. I'm an ambitious person. I like to try new things. And in the position where I was at before, there was not a culture of trying a whole bunch of new things. Now, they wanted innovation, but not in my area. And I would bring new things to the table, and they would get skirted just because they weren't familiar. So for me, that was really creeping on my boundaries, because I was not able to establish and grow and do things that were making me happy. All right, so the first category I'm going to talk about, of course, work and life. I kind of have these kind of entering, you kind of flipping back and forth, of course, work-life balance, right? Purpose relationships versus your personal relationships. Purpose relationships really are things that kind of, I didn't mean to, take that off, get off, sorry. Purpose relationships are those where you are fulfilling your purpose in life. I have on here not only bosses, but peers that kind of really drive and inspire you. You might create a boundary with a peer, like at work, or your job might create a boundary with peer companies. And the boundaries that you might set, of course, data protection, cybersecurity, those are the boundaries, of course, that your company might set. But you as a partner, like you might work with your friend and he works at a company that's a competitor. Maybe there's certain conversations that you'll have over your beer after work. And when certain topics come up, that's your boundary, because even though he's your friend and you trust him, maybe that your job might be insecure. It might be a threat to your job, or maybe it might be a threat to your sense of loyalty to your job. So these are some scenarios where you might set boundaries with a peer. I know specifically here, I find the client relationship to be very hairy. So as you know, I'm an entrepreneur, and I've had many clients. And specifically when I'm starting out with new clients, boundaries is a topic that is very critical. You need to establish when you're going to be available, what time you're not going to be available, what the best route to talk to them is. And then even more importantly, when you're an entrepreneur or a freelancer like I was doing, you need to establish, so as a freelancer, you need to establish what the scope of what you're going to perform is. So when you're doing something like freelance design work, you want to establish what the price is. But if you do something like hourly, you really need to establish what you are and aren't going to do, because they'll think, well, if I'm paying an hour, you can do it. I'll pay you to do whatever, and your hours are just going to log up, and you'll get way out of your range. So establishing boundaries as a entrepreneur, like with freelance, in my experience, that's very critical. It's very hairy. It's very easy to get out of bounds and not know it, and just because you're trying to, excuse me, you're trying to keep that client. Establishing boundaries as an entrepreneur, it's a little bit different because, since you're kind of your boss, you're kind of growing and building something. You need to be in your wheelhouse, and you need to understand when you need to outsource and when you need to bring in partner for certain resources and things that you need to do. That's where I've been struggling. I've gotten lost. I felt lost, and that's what I talked about in the last episode, that feeling lost is something in my purpose that's kind of brought me to really learning about setting boundaries. And that's because sometimes I will start to do the one-man show to the extent that I'm trying to learn everything instead of hiring somebody, and I'm not moving forward. I'm kind of moving parallel. So let's move on to life relationships. I have, you can see it says role relationships. Anyway, these are the ones I talked about: friends, your intimate friends and family, your extended friends and family, like your cousins or people you don't necessarily reach out to except for maybe holidays, and your extended friends that are maybe just the ones that are on Facebook or social media, your community, your neighbors, your rivals and your enemies. Those are really key in terms of boundaries. You will interact with them. A lot of the times your boundaries are probably really, really high, especially with an enemy. A rival is not necessarily the same as an enemy. A rival is definitely someone who is kind of like a competitor. You guys could work together, but you all are trying to get the same thing. So just to designate the difference between a rival and an enemy, that could be somebody who you're maybe fake friends with. A rival could be the same as an enemy. But anyway, a rival just means somebody who you both of y'all are trying to vie for the exact same thing. Y'all might love each other and help each other along the way, but still be rivals. And that can really create a situation where you need to be clear on your boundaries when, let me try to identify a rival in my life. So for a while, my son was doing flag football, or my son was doing tackle football, and I was trying to be one of the coaches. And I have some college, my college friend wasn't really a rival, but there were other people on the team, other dads on the team who wanted to be a coach as well. So I was vying or rivaled with all these dads who I loved to sit on the sideline and talk with. And we were all trying to be the coach, get one or two coaching positions. And of course, that didn't mean we didn't help each other. We didn't talk to each other. But as rivals, there was certain things at certain times that I would make sure that I would show up. And I knew part of the boundary was, hey, don't tell them everything because, again, I was trying to vie for that same position. So here's the other area where I wanted to talk about and kind of wrap it up. What you own and what you don't own. So this level of boundary, this is all internal. And remember, now, I don't think I've gotten into this, but when you talk about boundaries, you don't necessarily always set boundaries with another person. These other two are boundaries with other people, and these are different relationships. But these are boundaries that you set inside your own mind and inside your own world. And sometimes you do not they reflect outwardly, your own dreams, beliefs, your response to fears. You might set a boundary with your relationship to fear, that you're not going to let it do certain things, or that you will respond in certain ways. You might set a boundary with your own health and your own body. Again, these are owned by you. They're intrapersonal. So your own body might, you maybe need to set a boundary about your alcohol, or you might need to set a boundary about your exercise routines. And I'm not going to skip more than 2 days. I am going to shower every morning. I am not going to eat French fries and donuts. And you need to learn to then respect those boundaries. So this is one area, again, we'll talk about a lot more. I want to get into this when we start defining boundaries. But I think a lot of people don't necessarily know and maybe think of boundaries in the sense of the relationships that you have in your own mind. You can set boundaries there, and you need to check those boundaries also. Not owned boundaries. So these are things that maybe impact your world. They're inside your head, but they're shared. Ideas. You don't own ideas. In fact, if you had, like, say for instance, me for my business ideas, things pop into my head, thoughts pop into my head, feelings pop into my head, and they all can kind of spur some inspiration. So they all kind of are ideas until I start to write it down. So when I write it down, now that's actually copywritten. That's actually intellectual property. I can write the idea down, and now it becomes something that really I can protect as part of a business property. It still doesn't do anything until I actually start to act on it. Until I actually put a plan to that idea. The idea is, again, it's an inspiration. It is a point. It is a thought. It is a change. It's something that's out there. And it might be just copying something else that's out there. But I don't own that idea. That idea is not owned until we put action to it. And sometimes I need to set boundaries around those ideas. And let me give you one. So an idea of, like, maybe prejudice. And I'm not even talking about just racial prejudice, but prejudging the way a person who I would hire would look or act or what they'll say. If somebody comes to me, if I find somebody and I'm trying to hire somebody to build a project, and I note that their resume is a little empty, and I note that their online social media, they talk about really, really, really amateur stuff. Like, I don't know how to do something, of course, that I'm going to hire for. I've only done one or two. You can't really find much on them. I might prejudge that the person would not be somebody good to work with. In fact, one of the best people that I've worked with so far, he was on Fiverr. He had a really great Fiverr account. But I love working with the guy because he worked with me tirelessly and very responsibly over Christmas and New Year's. Got everything that he said needed to get done, was very responsive, and worked and put my satisfaction over just exchanging the money. So that's those are ideas. Possessions, even though they're outside, you can't own them. The boundary that you might set with them would really be, I'm saying, it's out there in the world, because I want the world to not take my car. I don't necessarily care if I use my car. I want my son to not steal my car. So that's what I mean by I don't own that boundary. I'm putting it out there, and I want others to respect it where I draw the line. And this is the next topic, discussing transforming boundaries. So a lot of the times when we have an unhealthy signal in place and we are starting to try to say, no, people who've crossed the line, this is what's going to happen. You need to reset. So that's what I'm going to try to talk about the next time. I'm going to start talking through some stories and some ideas for resetting boundaries. Let me see. Okay, so just to sign off here, I wanted to talk to you also, and this is going to be a long live. Sorry, this is the first one, but that's cool. Listen to as much as you can. I'm gonna have replays on workgameperk.com, but I wanted to talk to you, anybody who's still listening, about a project that I have that's really it's gonna be geared towards my audience, and I'm really planning on helping, and that's this big ultimate list of podcasts and books for setting boundaries. I want to do it live. I want to come on here and do a live uh, product build of this curation product that has it's like the ultimate guide for setting boundaries and self-care, where I'm looking to find like 50 or 40 different resources that you can find and build a framework for kind of having it be easy to understand which parts you need where, rating them and reviewing them, and then delivering them, making them really easy to grab. So if you are working on your boundaries for, let's say, for your New Year's, or you're still just working on personal boundaries to kind of get adapted to going back to your flexible workplace, I've got you covered. So look for this. Please sign up at workgameperk.com/wellmadepodcast. And for my to be part of my audience, I will let you know when that comes up, and you can join my live. All right, until next time.